Yeah.
Okay, let's get started for this wonderful lecture we've got in front of you by Chingwen Cheng. So this is part of the Zube lecture series, and I'll start out with that. We've got academic experts, we've got professional leaders, we've got alumni that come in from really around the world for this lecture series. And we have guest speakers almost every week in the fall and winter semesters. Zube endowed this series first in the 90s, I think, or early 2000s. He gave his first donation for this lecture series. And he was a former professor and head of the department here from 1974 to 1980. And he happened to be a very important mentor of mine. I knew him very well from his time here and then his time at Arizona State University, where he went after he left here, after he finished being department head. And he was very concerned with education and with providing a wide range of influences to people who are studying landscape architecture and planning. And so for him, having a lecture series was a fundamental part of how we learn. And getting enough information from around the world in order to be able to grow as designers, as planners, as community development specialists. So that was fundamental to who he was. He passed away in 2001. And in his honor, his wife Margaret endowed the lecture series with additional funds in 2004. And so what we have now is a really robust series of lecturers that we can bring people in from almost anywhere in the world once a week to talk to you. So this is a really fundamental part of this department and the programs that make up our department. In that context, it is a challenge to introduce Chingwen Cheng, who is now director of the Stuckeman School at Pennsylvania State University. What I mean by challenge is, how do you introduce somebody that has done so much in a very short period of time? She is a dynamo. So I first knew Chingwen when I started teaching at the University of Michigan. And the second year I was teaching, Chingwen came to join the school for her master's degree. And so I got to know Chingwen as a student and one who was absolutely passionate about landscape architecture, about design, and about learning about the world. And she graduated from the University of Michigan and went on to various positions as a professional licensed landscape architect. And then I was aware of her doing great work, particularly in Florida. And then one day I got this email saying, what do you think? Do you think I could do my PhD up at UMass? This was when I had moved to UMass as department head, and I was like, oh my God, Chingwen's coming back. She's going to be a student with us again. And I was looking at this very personally because I was so excited to work with her again. She's done such a wide range of things. I can really only gloss over the surface of who she is and what she's done. She, beyond being a landscape architect, a licensed landscape architect, she's a scholar, a very accomplished scholar, many books, book chapters, papers. I can't even begin to cite them all off. And she's an advocate for climate justice design research, which is what she's going to talk to us about today. She serves on the executive steering committee for the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, Sustainable Cities and Landscapes Hub, and on the executive board of CELA, the Council of Educators of Landscape Architects, and she's chair of the CELA conference this year. So she's got her PhD in regional planning from UMass in 2013, not that long ago. And her Master of Landscape Architecture in 2001 from the University of Michigan, and her Bachelor of Science in Horticulture and Landscape Architecture from National Taiwan University in Taipei. Looking at the lists of honors and recognitions, what stood out to me and what didn't surprise me one little bit is that she was Educator of the Year in the Arizona chapter, American Society of Landscape Architects, Educator of the Year. And she was nominated for Outstanding Faculty Mentor Award. And those two things go together and really exemplify who she is and the kind of care she takes about people. And that's one of the things that I recognized about her very, very early on, is that she's incredibly caring for people. And that leads to this idea, I think, of environmental justice and climate change. Really, that caring for people is so important. Before being at the Stuckeman School, she was program head of landscape architecture, urban design, and environmental design at Arizona State University in Tempe. And as I said before, she was a well-regarded professional in a couple of different firms. But before I pass the presentation over to her, I wanted to call out a couple of research projects that she has ongoing, investigating how relationships between urban ecological infrastructure and human-environment interactions shape the structure and function of urban ecosystems. It's really about people and nature. And sustainable, resilient, and just environmental design performance tool for heat mitigation in the Phoenix metro area. You would have to be totally off the news not to know that we have reached record highs in many cities around the world, especially Phoenix, to the point that it is becoming impossible to live in those heat areas. So I'm really looking forward to her presentation, Climate Justice Design and Advocacy for Community Resilience. Thank you, Chingwen.
Thank you, Liz. I'm beyond moved. I don't even know how to follow this generous and comprehensive introduction. I really appreciate it. It has really come a long way. And I'm really humbled and honored to be standing in front of you all here. So let me start with this presentation. And I did have this, but I think we don't need it anymore. So do want to highlight, yes, I'm alone, and thank you for your welcoming. So I'll get to the topic. I have three things I'd like to touch on of all the work I'm trying to synthesize in these three terms: climate justice, community resilience, and advocacy. So, and this really I'm trying to kind of outline things like finished my PhD in 2013 and all the work I've done and how I kind of synthesized my work. So I have done nature-based solution, kind of landscape performance evaluations, and that's when my dissertation is about climate change, the risk assessment for climate change-induced flooding hazards. And then how I include the social vulnerability in that assessment and kind of made me aware that environmental justice and other climate change impacts, that's climate justice issues. And then how people perceive those risks, how we work with communities, and through teaching as well, and how we integrate this together. And really in this interconnected social, ecological, technological systems, and this kind of framework together, that's what I call climate justice design together. So I'll go dive into a few papers I worked on. So first, right, to understand the climate change impacts, and we know our city, has been built upon the past knowledge of, especially, if you do the stormwater calculation. Actually, let me know, how many are landscape architecture students here? Raise your hand. How about regional planning? Great, thank you. And how many are undergrads here? Good. Thank you. So you may have done some stormwater calculation, right? Remember those calculation you based on the data probably from 50 or decades ago. But then under climate change, those data may not be accommodating the current status. And that's the challenge for the cities, right? Our infrastructure was built upon the past knowledge. And a lot of also flooding can prove you flooding happen in the city because of those impervious surfaces and urbanization impact. So our paper kind of look at a few cities and see how those the past kind of design implementation, if we use today's climate change projection, and how much of that difference of those infrastructure may be actually out of capacity. So that's an argument of how we can thinking about designing better for climate resilience in the cities. And another paper we worked on, so I have done a lot of work, it's really interdisciplinary. And so I work with ecologists, engineers, and other different fields. So this is really, this framework and came out with capital TR is the long-term ecological research project, and looking at how we can look deeply into the intersection between social, ecological, technological systems. Because we know the complexity in the world is not, each system is not independent and exclusive from itself. And we were hoping this framework can give us better insights, how we can do better design planning to think about that intersection between those systems. And we apply this framework to urban flooding assessment framework. And from the classic kind of hazard study, right, of mobility, it's about exposure to hazards and your adaptability, your sensitivity to different hazards. And then overlapping this SETS framework, we use this example to identify indicators from each of the group, and then this is a spatial analysis for understanding how different cities and how this SETS framework can assess better, give us other insights about the linkages between different systems. So you can see there's a lot of GIS work, and identify the flooding maps, and then the social vulnerability, ecological vulnerability, and the technological vulnerability. But what's more interesting is this, linked systems. So this can identify if there's an area, right, there's a social vulnerability, there are communities exposed to the hazards, you're linked with social and ecological. But now with technological systems, also interlinked. They may not have adequate infrastructure or resources to cope with those climate change hazards, then they become even more vulnerable. So we were hoping this framework can help us as a planner and designers, give us more insights about what resources we may need to prioritize and what strategies we may think about differently if we understand the complexity of those interconnected systems. In my own work, I applied those civil assets framework, and I intersect those and I call it climate justice scape. So I first looking at the flooding hazards, and that was actually extension of my dissertation on flooding. But then I'm also curious at a national scale and after Katrina, and looking at that time, between 2005 and 2015, in those 10 years, whether the pattern have climate justice gap exists in the whole nation. So I look at social vulnerability, and again, using the spatial analysis. And then ecological vulnerability, this is from the national data on the number of hazards, on different hazards, counting together. And then technological vulnerability, it means the access to green spaces. So it counter that you don't have, if we assume having an open space and green infrastructure can help to mitigate those hazards, if you are lack of that, then that can be more vulnerable. So combining all this together, and this is what I call the climate justice scape in the entire US. And then if you overlap with the city data and you start looking at interesting pattern is, yes, there are some cities exposed to climate justice, this pattern, but there are even more rural communities are also facing climate change and impacts. And usually those rural communities has less resources, and so we can argue that they were even more vulnerable in those situations. So how can we think about prioritizing different resources distribution? And I did this also apply to when I was doing my postdoc back to Michigan. This actually was my first kind of pilot study. But not only I applied this to this spatial climate justice scape, I followed up this and I was curious how people perceive the risks. And was that different than the projected risk? So I did a survey. I also interviewed the planners because at that time, 3 cities were identified as hotspots. Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and Wixom. So I did a survey for the entire state and also interviewed the city managers and trying to understand, how they perceive the risk differently, and did some statistical analysis and defined there were some gaps about their perceived exposure to the climate change impact, and then their perceived sensitivity, how they feel they are more sensitive to those risks, and how much they think they can cope with those hazards. So I think this was really interesting to me is to understand those gaps. And again, as a planner and designers, how we can bridge that gap, right? How we can distribute and plan and design better the strategies so they can be better prepared for climate change impacts. And interesting another study, I found out how the data, again, this can be differently from the document from government officials' data and the people reporting data. There are sometimes there are community groups, they will do like stone tracing, for example. I think this is probably also why there was some peak when people start the community science, but then they start actually recording more. And they're actually interesting, have perceived the risk and data are actually different than what's actually being recorded or measured data. So again, there's a gap in the risk communication. So what I kind of come up with is also thinking about, okay, if people perceive the risk differently and how their adaptive capacity also differently, can be equity and justice issue in how different community can be more resilient on the climate change impact. And why we want to talk about resilience. We know now we are exposing and experiencing all this extreme events. It becomes even uncertain now with climate change, with increased intensity of all these hazards. And so many things become uncertain as a planner and designer. How we can plan for that? And COVID is probably one example we all experience. Who will thought about all these great disturbances, right, in our system and at a global scale? And if you think about how the community can be resilient, again, back to those different systems, it's all interlinked, right? We have social capital, social system, there's ecological system, technological system, and in the community, the economic resilience can also be important. So this actually examples during COVID, and interesting, we see some news, right? The animals actually came back to the city when people were not there. And quickly on the theory of resilience. So this concept actually started, probably we can trace back to psychology, how a person experiences trauma and how individually you can recover and still be resilient. That's psychology using this term. But we are really familiar probably in ecological resilience since Howling in 1971 kind of published paper on the adaptive cycle of ecosystems and how they can be resilient and through this adaptive cycle. So this is just kind of one example of how you can think about the fire in the forest, right? You will go through this cycle of, so when there is a fire and it started, after that, the old species will come in, so there's one we call early succession species, right? And then after it got conservation, then you become mature forest. But then if you start getting the disturbance again, you will release the energy and then reorganize again. So this is adaptive cycle. And some social scientists also use this adaptive cycle to apply to cities, example. So you can also think about how Detroit, right? For example, they also gone through bankruptcy and now coming back. The city also can have this cycle. So social institutional resilience is kind of coming from the ecological resilience concept. So I will highly encourage you to read this, very easy reading. But quickly can give you a little overview of what the resilience concept is. So in a nutshell, resilience is about the capacity to withstand those change and respond to those crises. And also not only that, I think more importantly, how we can evolve and better transform to a better state. So we talked a little bit about vulnerability and resilience. And just a quick note about when you look at this picture, do you think it's vulnerable or resilient? This is an elementary school in Thailand, and it's under a high tide. And you can see the door is open, so they are still in school. So, how many people think this is vulnerable community? Where's it? Okay, how many people think it's resilient? Wow, you got more resilient here. Great, actually, I guess just a little 5 minutes theory, maybe you got that. So, it's probably both, right? Yes, so like physically, yes, they are exposed to the hazards, they are vulnerable in a way, they are, but they are also resilient because those disturbances did not interfere how they function, they continue to function. So, and when I was diving into more about vulnerability, and when I was in postdoc, I was under Dr. Pomo Hai, who is really a pace setter in environmental justice research. And so when I also started looking into the systemic injustice and vulnerability, and I like this, even it's old, but the concept, the theory behind it, I think still persists, still valid today. Because we look at, we exposed to those hazards, but you will not be at risk if you are not exposed to the hazards. So that's the first exposure. If you are not exposed to those hazards, you'll be fine. But then, now about risk. How risky will you be in your community? It really can trace back to many decisions made and systems were established. So that's it. How many of you heard about redlining? Yes, you all have to. We have regional planning degree here, right? So that's part of that, right? Causing the root cause, right? How the institutional injustice can be in place generations ago. And those decisions made in the past will still impact the generation today. Right, so a lot of times, if you look at, you may also heard about, your health can be defined by your zip code. How many of you heard about this concept? Okay, now you have more homework to do. And how about social determined health? Okay, so good. All right, so you can look into those terms and why those systems, again, you kind of back to the SETS framework, right? We thought that natural hazards natural, but if you start adding the social systems, technological systems, and how much we plan and designed, actually induced natural hazards, right? Flooding, like I just talked about so much flooding, and we also learned about why we need to have bioswales, right? How we want to reduce the impervious surfaces. And that's all part of our decision in the social systems and how we design the technological systems that intersect within this SETS framework. So the root of cause can really determine the community's resilience and vulnerability. And you look at Katrina, I don't know, you may be still young, I don't know if you were born yet, when the Katrina happened. And this poster was out, when Katrina happened and something about resources coming, and then, but they say, don't stop calling me resilient. Because every time you say, oh, we are resilient, that means you can do something to me again, I'm not resilient. Although I would say this, if you notice, it's different than the resilience definition as I mentioned earlier. And obviously, they are looking at the engineering resilience. Engineering resilience is static. It's like a spring, you push down, you expect it to be back to the same level, right? So that's basically with Professor Jack Ahern, if you read his paper, right, it's fail safe, safe to fail. So the engineering resilience is fail safe. And our social resilience, ecological resilience is safe to fail, right? So you can tell that in this case, the communities, they may have different definition and conception about what resilience is. So to me, the concept co-design is important here, right? How we can work with community together and to how we co-define what the resilience is, how can we co-develop strategies, right? And then prioritize implementations. And this is what actually I combine all of my concepts together, and that's why I actually want to highlight advocacy here, because I believe each of us has a role to play. And I believe co-design is part of the advocacy actually our profession can do. So in my book chapter here, I try to kind of write down the kind of this intersection of different systems about systemic vulnerability, community resilience, and climate justice and sustainability. And actually this is part of that APRU Sustainable City and Landscape Research Hub. There's a book we collectively published, and I was leading one session. So my work, nature-based solutions, climate justice concept, and how we co-design solutions with community to enhance their resilience. And you think about sustainability, it's about those 3 E's. We should tell students 3 E's, right? The environment, equity, and economy. And then now we have SETS framework, social, ecological, technological systems. And I can argue, but I think this is one of the largest challenges in our world right now. On the social level is a systemic injustice. On the ecological driver is climate change. So how can we look at how we can reduce the vulnerability, enhance the resilience, and address justice and work with community together? And this includes the deeper understanding the root cause of the risks and how we work that co-design with community. And then based on our expertise in nature-based solutions, how we can all work together. And when I'm now, my current kind of deeper dive into justice is looking at justice theory, and this is another paper under written is, we look at in the literature, what are the concept of justice? And we identified 4 categories. The first one, the second one, probably you may be already familiar, right? Distributive justice. That's actually my climate justice scape, and a lot of paper, the different access to green space or tree canopy, a lot of those outcome-based analysis are distributive justice. And procedural justice means the decision-making process, whether people, different stakeholders, who's on the table, are in that process of decision-making. And some people will argue that the outcome, even outcome is just, if the procedure is not just, some people can consider it's not just. So it's different. There's no right or wrong, but there's just different ways how we can look at justice. And I think the third one may not be as explicit in many of our projects or our field. Restorative justice, that includes recognition of justice and correctional justice. Recognition of justice is how we can recognize the past harm. Actually, in these recent years, I probably should have had one slide about land acknowledgement. So I think we started to acknowledge, what was the past harm. Although I always argue that we don't stop there. Acknowledgement is really only the very, very first step. but then how we can further and really look into how we correct, how we can be restorative about the past harm that's done to the community, how we can work with them to help them to heal and to move forward or be empowered to thrive. The last, generational justice, I think is probably in line with sustainability, but I think, in terms of economy, we all probably, experience the generational inequity, and then how we can think about our decision made today also will affect generations to come. And as a planner designers, I am now thinking how we can operationalize those theories and how we can make our practice accountable to justice outcomes and goals. So this is my kind of first attempt to start looking from how we practice, right? This probably align a lot of what in your studio is doing. You start looking at how you frame the problem, right? How you identify the issues, and then you collect data, and then you do the design concept development, and that's a lot of what practice is doing as well. And then in practice, of course, we implement construction, documents if you're doing working on that, and then how you manage and maintain it. And then we want to know, right, how well this design is done, if that meets the goals. So evaluation and learning from the project is important. And this is all it's all cycling process. So each process can go back and reinforming the next one. And then at the end, I think it's important to think about giving back to the community and the long-term stewardship with the community. Because many times you design a project, it's not your backyard. So how we can think about that long-term sustainability and stewardship with the community. And that's part of the advocacy as well. So this is, again, a little bit process about how we can think about this justice dimensions, and then they can be embedded in each steps of how we practice. And eventually, the ideally will be, once we start really thinking about those justice goals, and it will really help us towards the transformation of our system, how we rectify the current injustice systems in how we practice, in how we do things, in how we live, how we make decisions. And that together will make our environment, our systems more just. And then I want to use this, actually, I use that framework to go back to a project I did with students, and this is kind of a self-assessment back, I would say. So this is the one way I'm thinking how I use that framework to assess my own work. So this is one example at ASU with the MLA student. And so this is one example how we can start using that framework to ask ourselves, right? So for any project, you can start thinking, well, this is in Phoenix. So what's the history of the environmental justice in Phoenix, right? Who are the minority groups in this project? How we address those? And are there any past harms done? So, and then we, doing our collection of data analysis and literature review, right? So in this case, this charter school is in South Phoenix, and it's in the historical Red Line area. There's this charter school is a minority serving charter school, and then we can think about distributive, whether the community is exposed to the hazards in a different ways, and we can look at the site analysis, right? So as As it's been mentioned, yes, heat is a big issue in this area. And so we can measure and look at the heat index, and also kind of the same on the other side of the coin is how much green space, how much green infrastructure is available to mitigate heat. And this area also had flooding. This campus has been frequently flooded, and also a lot of concrete, really kind of urbanized campus. So then when we design our concept, we can start thinking, right, who should be involved in this process, and who decides and who benefits in these outcomes? How can we incorporate local knowledge into the design? So we did a couple workshops with our community, which are students and their parents and staff. And you can design different activities, and then you bring those information back to your studio, your drawing board, and then you can develop concept a different way, and we went back to our community again to get a second feedback. And then those feedback come back. And so initially, after first workshop, students developed their own concept. And we went back to the community to get another round of concept feedback and come back, and then they integrate all comments into one final project, one final plan, and this is like the final result. And again, you can integrate all this sustainable design and strategy you've learned in class. And we happened to win the EPA award from this project. But this principal, the founder of Charter School, he did not stop with concept. He actually wanted to implement it. So I actually helped him. I should tell him to hire a landscape architect to actually do the construction document. So again, in this process, right, who should be involved in that decision making? So they do have a plan, and they actually started construction, and they implemented the project, and it did work. This really aligned with student concept and more design. And then again, based on this project implementation, there's also maintenance. There were discussion about whether the school kids they want to have nature-based learning outdoors, and also involved in the curricular development. So in all this process, you can really work with community to think about how that design can be maintained, manage it, and can be more accurately. And this is really after the students really enjoy. Really, it's very different campus. So I think I believe in this project we can achieve a couple of those concepts of justice and trying to address those in this studio process. And also because this project was also involved with other faculty in ASU at that time. They have an MOU with this charter school, so actually there were a couple evaluation, assessment of this landscape, and can be integrated into the process. And that really helps to know whether the students are happier, playing in more naturalized landscapes, and whether the water, is cleaner or mitigate the floods, or whether those plants can mitigate air pollution, etc. So I asked myself what I could have asked in this process in terms of justice framework. And I probably did not ask about, this is actually, this state, that area is indigenous sacred site. There was South Mountain, actually indigenous community considered as a sacred mountain. And it's really, this charter school is right under that mountain. So in our design studio process, actually we did not trace back enough to actually include indigenous knowledge and understand that past harms to them. Actually, a couple communities there, they were relocated a couple of times. There was an airport extension, and the community were relocated to the South Phoenix. So yeah, there were still a lot of kind of generational justice, but still happened in Phoenix. So that's kind of my own kind of assessment for my own project and learning. And I kind of want to continue to say why the co-design matters and why now I always say the process probably matters more than the product. There was another project, the studio project we did in Hawaii when I was at ASU. And that was Hawaii Canal. It was in the Oahu Island. How many of you been to Hawaii? And you know that is the most tourist area. And the Army Corps engineer, they say 20 years ago they started to work with community, but then in the past probably 5 years they started to propose a plan how we can better cope with climate change, sea level rises, and their solution was to build a 5-foot wall, flood wall along the canal. Also to acquire some private property for retention fund. And then when the community learned about this, they said no, right? So they started this campaign to stop the Hawaii Canal project. And then they won, and then the state initially was getting $250 million and got stopped. So maybe they get the funding. So that was probably a lesson for the state to learn, right? How they could have, hopefully, right, in any project to bring community at forefront in a process decision making. That's the procedural justice that matters. And again, you can include all other aspects of justice and to think how we can co-design the community resilience. So that's why I called it how we co-design community resilience. I think there are a couple, maybe some key concepts and kind of takeaway of why this is important. Because I think in this process, you can really emphasize a meaningful engagement, right? So you can respect, integrate the diverse voices, and think about knowledge co-creation. Knowledge is not just scientists' privilege, right? The community have knowledge as well. So how we can co-create the knowledge together, that's one of the essence of co-design. And we believe co-design is the foundation to achieve equity. So in that process, you will truly address who is not on the table, who benefits, who decides, and that process outcomes will go hand in hand. And then how we can really prevent from these services and distrust and all the negative impacts we have done in the community. Academia was notoriously being the ones that abusing the communities and so I think we have a responsibility to ensure in this process we will do no more harm. And I always tell students too, if you are not sure, if your process is not meaningful, it's not true, if you are not thinking giving back to the community, don't even start. So don't think about it, you just want to get data and finish your dissertation or research and get out. Okay, so you better even not to start and talk to your advisor and look for different topic. So I think it's important what we do is meaningfully, and we should be accountable for those outcomes as well. So I believe the co-design can cultivate, eventually cultivate stewardship for community to sustain the long term. So to me, the resilience, again, not ecological, not engineering resilience, but thinking about more transformative. And taking the crisis into opportunities. And so when the opportunities comes, how we can bounce forward. And even in normal circumstances, how can we cultivate capacity? Again, resilience is about the capacity to deal with change. So how we can, in this co-design process, to build up the capacity with community, to build a better, sustainable, just environment with the community. And I want to give you the final few examples and also how you can do as advocacy. First of all, in the advocacy for our own field, our own profession. Nature-based solution is term probably people now heard so frequently. And the UN defined as kind of using the ecosystem-based ecological design to address societal challenges. And like some example of, reforestation, weather restoration, all this. And we can say, this is what we have been doing as a landscape architect, right? How we design with nature, and a lot of the ecological design is one of our fundamental principles as a landscape architect. And so, how we can advocate for what we do, everybody can help that. And then we also, as academia, how we can integrate research right into your practice as well. Because doing evidence-based can help us advocate even more what the values we bring. My own example is I did have these two projects with Landscape Architecture Foundation in Landscape Performance Series. The one is at ASU Orange Mall. The other is at Apostle Pedestrian Pathway. So this is one way, actually, this one kind of advocacy is to show the evidence of how our profession can contribute to the sustainable development. This is one example all of you can also think about. If you haven't looked at this, look it up. There's a handbook, it's Environmental Justice for Landscape Architecture and the Student's Guide. And those are 3 students at a time when they were at La Vache, and they had this idea, and they just want to produce this booklet to talk about what is environmental justice, and they won the ASOA Communication Award. So you can have your own idea, and just do it. My own example, I'm also on the ASOA, serving on the ASOA. I was a co-chair for environmental justice PPN, Professional Practice Network, and I was also on this advisory group committee for climate action plan that was ASA published in 2022. And there's another little booklet. I also encourage you to check it out. In this little booklet, it is an advocacy guide for practitioners, for landscape architects, to think about what can we do, each of us can do at a different level of advocacy. As individual and with yourself, as an employer, you can go with the employer, and also with the community. So I will also highly encourage you to check it out. So finally, thank you all for coming here. And I also want to give special thanks to LRP. I really appreciate, all my academic career started here and really prepared me as a great researcher. So all what Professor Bradbeck talked about, it's really, I have to thank Professor Bradbeck and all the faculty and the colleagues here to help me. And also, Professor Bradbeck gave me the opportunity to teach as well. So I really appreciate that's how my academic career started here. So thank you. And if you have questions or interested, as my contact, And I wish you all have great experience at lab, and I believe lab will give you, lab prepare you for your career, but also the community itself is important. So, thank you.
We can take a couple of questions.